Welcome to this special edition of the World Trade Webcast. I'm Greg Sandler, president of ThinkGlobal.com, the B2B network for global trade leads. This week on the World Trade Webcast, we're focusing on the battle over reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. This week, we'll focus on the argument for reauthorization, and next week, we'll focus on the argument against reauthorization. Our guest today is Dr. Carolyn Freund, Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and a member of the U.S. Export-Import Bank Advisory Committee. Prior to joining the Peterson Institute, Dr. Freund served as an economist at the World Bank. Carolyn, welcome to the World Trade Webcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're really happy to have someone with your expertise. And to set the stage for our discussion, let me give our viewers a little bit of historical perspective. The Export-Import Bank of the United States, an independent U.S. government agency, is facing a reauthorization battle on Capitol Hill. The Ex-Im Bank is the official export credit agency of the United States, and it's an independent, self-sustaining agency that provides financing for the export of American goods and services. The Ex-Im Bank was reauthorized in September 2014, and the bank's current charter expires on June 30th, 2015. So Carolyn, can you provide us with some background and context about this reauthorization battle?
Yeah, in some ways the battle's kind of a crazy thing because it's hard to understand why anybody would oppose an institution that actually turns money over to the Treasury. So let me just start by saying the Export-Import Bank actually gives money to the Treasury. It gave, I think, $600 million last year and over $1 billion the year before. So this is not an institution that's receiving government money, rather it's returning government money, it's making a profit. So having said that, the opponents argue that it's a subsidy because it is in the financial sector giving loans to businesses that might otherwise get them from the private sector, therefore it's distorting the private sector. So they call it a subsidy, but it is not, and I repeat, it is not taking any taxpayer money for the agency. So their concern is that it's distorting the financial market and that maybe it could be a risk to taxpayers because if there was to be a problem with any of these loans. But the loans are so incredibly low risk, it's hard to see how any of these arguments are true.
Very good. And another argument in favor of Ex-Im Bank reauthorization is that it supports jobs. And of course, opponents argue that the bank is simply extrapolating job data claims and that it really has no clear idea on how many jobs are supported. Is there a jobs benefit? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the supporters see the jobs angle very clearly. These small businesses, mainly 90% of the transactions are with small businesses. Many of them wouldn't be able to maintain their employee base if they weren't able to export. And the problem is the traditional banking sector, the private banking sector doesn't want to serve these clients. So they're able to maintain these jobs because of the Export-Import Bank, as well as many of the large firms as well. So what the bank does is it looks at all the jobs that are being supported through the loans it gives, and it calculates, over 1 million jobs since 2009. But the important thing is, that might not sound like a lot, but it supports jobs even more in hard times. So especially when other banks weren't able to lend, say during the crisis, the Export-Import Bank can jump in and help improve job security, which is something that American workers care a lot about. Export jobs also pay higher wages, they offer better benefits. So these are the good jobs that American workers are looking for. So there's definitely a job angle with respect to what the Export-Import Bank is doing.
Indeed. And as you pointed out, proponents argue that 90% of Ex-Im transactions benefit small businesses. But opponents are crying corporate welfare, and they point to companies like Boeing and Caterpillar. as among the big corporate beneficiaries. Let's talk a little bit more about the benefit to small businesses. I think you articulated some of that already, and what the rationale is for supporting big U.S. corporations with this kind of assistance.
Well, I think with respect to the big corporations, the issue is they need to be able to compete on a level playing field. So their competitors from big exporting countries like Germany or China are getting this kind of service from export credit agencies in their own countries. So without our own bank there to back our companies up, we would lose contracts. And there are workers at Boeing. There's also workers at 7,000 small businesses that sell Boeing parts. All the parts that go into an airplane aren't produced by Boeing alone. So it's that economy-wide benefit of having these large corporations. And quite simply, they would not be able to compete in many markets if the Export-Import Bank wasn't there to help them get those contracts.
So really, then what you're saying is that with some 60 other countries around the world having export credit banks, that eliminating the bank would put U.S. exporters at a competitive disadvantage, both large and small?
Yeah, absolutely. China's export credit agencies have given more money in the last 2 years than the U.S. Export-Import Bank has given, or not given because these are loans, but authorized since its inception. So if you were going to go buy a car and one dealer is offering you a 4% interest rate and another dealer is offering you a very, very low interest rate, maybe even close to zero, which one are you going to buy? Even if you slightly prefer the higher quality product, you might get sold by that extra savings you get from going with the other choice. So this really is necessary in this environment. So I think a lot of economists would say, okay, let's just do a matching. If they're going to do it, we're going to do it. But that would actually raise the size of our Export-Import Bank, not lower it. We need this bank to compete.
Very good. And Ex-Im provides financing for U.S. customers abroad that would not otherwise have access to capital. And I guess one question that raises, why does it make sense for the federal government to provide financing that otherwise wouldn't be available in the commercial marketplace?
So the Export-Import Bank is filling a gap in the market. A small business might go to the bank when a private bank doesn't want to do this business because it requires backing up an importer in, say, Indonesia, and a regular bank in a city in Ohio doesn't know how to work with this Indonesian importer. So it's a very, very specific part of the market that's profitable, but is not as profitable as other businesses that the private sector is in. So they tend to ignore this part of the business. So the Export-Import Bank comes in and fills this gap. And without it being there, some of those deals simply would not happen. But I just want to reiterate, I know I've said this before, it is profitable. So there are profits to be made here. They just aren't the big profits that our banks, the traditional private banks, are going after. And sometimes these are very specific types of working capital that a company might need. And the Export-Import Bank has the experience, it has the know-how, and in many cases it works with the private banks. The private banks actually like it because it can help them out when it can't serve a client for a very specific need.
And certainly there are varying perspectives here, some of them sort of rooted in ideology about whether or not government should or shouldn't have a role in this. And there seems like some very unusual alliances in this battle over reauthorization.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy. On the one hand, you've got groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and National Association of Manufacturers who are fighting for reauthorization. And then you've got groups such as the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, and Public Citizen, which is a liberal advocacy group, both calling for the end to the bank. Can you give us some insight into what's driving these alliances and where we're headed moving forward?
Well, I think they're in this game for different reasons. So the far right just wants to see a smaller government. So their beef is what should the government be doing and what shouldn't it be doing. And they just think this is something it shouldn't be doing. And overall, they'd really like to have some feather in their cap on reducing government, and the Export-Import Bank might look like a pretty good target. The liberal groups have a different beef, which is about the large companies that are benefiting. So they think this is the kind of corporate welfare that how can we give special deals to big companies when these are the same big companies that aren't raising wages as fast as we would like, or something like that. But I think that argument is a bit off mark because, as I said, these big companies need this to compete with the other large producers from China, Germany, and other big exporters. So you have these two very different views on the Export-Import Bank that have come together around, squaring the circle, so to speak. That said, the center right, the center left, big business, workers' organizations, all of those want to see reauthorization.
Very well articulated. But of course, we know at the end of the day, reauthorization is going to hinge on what the elected officials on Capitol Hill decide. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe you could get your crystal ball out and we could end on this last question, which is if reauthorization were put to a vote today based on the current makeup of Congress, what do you think the outcome would be? And then looking forward to later in the year when this is really going to be a battle, what do you think the outcome will be?
So I think, actually yesterday, one of the representatives on the Republican side put forth some legislation for reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. And it was sponsored or co-sponsored by 58 Republicans. That's a big number. And you have Obama behind it. You have, which I think will rally the Democrats as well, or most of them. So I think if you could get a vote today, it would be reauthorized. The one problem is simply getting it out there, and then another problem. And because there's this delay in getting it out there, it gives the opponents time to make their case. I think it's going to be reauthorized. I think there might be some changes to its structure going forward, that kind of compromise to make everybody happy. But I for sure think it will be reauthorized.
Thank you. Very, very good perspective and very helpful. That's all the time we have today. We've been talking today with Dr. Carolyn Freund, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and a member of the U.S. Export-Import Bank Advisory Committee. Carolyn, thanks so much for sharing your perspectives with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We enjoyed having you. And please join us next week when the World Trade Webcast will continue its focus on reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Our guest will be Diane Katz, a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. In the meantime, for our latest schedule of upcoming episodes, subscribe to us with any of the links below and bookmark this page. All of our previous webcasts can be found at thinkglobal.com/webcast. And thanks for watching.